Hi, this is Caroline from The Happy Sensitive with a question. Can you spot a narcissist in 5 minutes? And if so, how? I got this question a few years ago now from an independent journalist who wrote articles, and he wanted to talk to me about that and didn't quite realize that was a question he was going to ask. We got into this really frustrating back and forth. Well, he kept insisting that there had to be a way that you could spot a narcissist right away, and what were the signs, and surely if you were an expert then you should know what the signs were. And I kept trying to explain to him that you can't really tell in 5 minutes, and if you think you can, I mean, of course you can tell like the most blatant, obvious kind of narcissism, you can spot that quickly, but there's so many varieties, and narcissism is more about someone's underlying attitude and their reasons for behaving, like why they do things and stuff. And it can, on the surface, it can look a lot of different ways, right? So there is no way that you can spot a narcissist in 5 minutes. And this is really important to realize, because if you think you can, if you keep looking for ways to spot narcissists in 5 minutes, one of two things is going to happen. You're going to like misdiagnose people, and you might throw a whole lot of great people out with the garbage for no good reason. And also you might become very suspicious, where you're constantly like, oh, are you a narcissist? And that's, that's not an attitude you want to have. You don't want to walk into the world assuming that everybody could be a narcissist and like trying to figure it out in 5 minutes. I think that's just really icky, as a way to live. So I think it's really important to realize there's no foolproof way to figure out quickly that someone is a narcissist. Now, why is that so important to realize? It's because one of the pitfalls with trying to stay out of unhealthy relationships and trying to stay away from unhealthy people, one of the pitfalls is thinking that you've got it all figured out and thinking that you know exactly what to look for. And then when those signs don't show up, you think, oh, I've got a green light, everything's great. And it's just not that simple. And what you really need to do is just take your time. Take your time and have boundaries around where you let people, like how far you let people into your life. Right? If you've done your own little 5-minute narcissist check and everything looks good, and then you let somebody straight into like the most vulnerable parts of yourself and your being, and you give them access to everything, like they have the key to your house and they can come and go whenever they want, you are asking for trouble. Okay? So what you want to do is just say, all right, I barely know this person, so they're going to stay kind of on the acquaintance level of access to me in my life. And then over time, I'm going to see how are they dealing with things? Are they reliable? Yes or no? What do they do? I spoke to someone recently who was telling me about her bike trips, and we're talking about bike trips back and forth, and she was saying that she had a friend previously, no longer a friend now, who she lent her bicycle to. And this was somebody, like she was someone who traveled far and wide with her bike, so her bike was very important. And it was an expensive bike, and she'd invested in the bike and all the gear and all the stuff for camping and everything. So this was not a $300, equipment. This was potentially thousands of dollars that she'd invested, and she lent it to someone that she knew. And this person took it on a trip somewhere around Asia, and then he got into a mix-up at the airport, and he realized that he wouldn't be able to take the bike with him. He could either get on the plane and leave the bike, or he would have to like take another flight. And what did he do? He left the bike behind. And then he came back and told her about it and said, "Yeah, I thought you might think this was funny." And of course, she didn't think it was funny, right? So as there's a lot of things I don't know about the scenario. I don't know how long she knew him. I just knew that of course you would expect someone to treat your property better, obviously, but the thing is, you don't know what people are going to do with your stuff, and you don't know how they're going to behave. And so one of the ways to kind of prevent something like this is also considering, okay, this gear is very dear to my heart, and if something happens to it, I'm going to be devastated, and I'm not sure everybody understands. Maybe don't lend that stuff to someone at all. Maybe if somebody wants to go on a bike trip, they can rent their own bike, or they can buy their own bike. They don't need to have your bike, right? So it kind of, instead of saying, okay, well, maybe there are ways for her to figure out that he was going to do this, just say, you know what, I think the risk for that is too high, unless you already know, you already know this person is really, really, really precious with other people's belongings, really careful with them, takes good care of them, and you have evidence of that, right? And then you can say, okay, well, normally I don't lend this out to anyone, but you're an exception because you take such good care of other people's stuff. Yes, you can borrow this for a few weeks. So yeah, I think one of the ways to make sure that you don't get your heart broken, that you don't get devastated by just selfish people, is just to be a little bit cautious about how much access you give them to your life and to your belongings and to your stuff and to your time and all of that. And not to say, oh, well, I did a 5-minute check, or I've known this person a little bit, or just make assumptions thinking, oh, I'm sure they're just like me and they take good care of their stuff, and so I'm sure it'll be fine. But really just check in with yourself, like, okay, you might be wrong. You might, you know, as far as you know, this person's a great person, but you don't know them that well. You haven't known them that long. So they might turn out to be not who you thought in some way. So you make sure that you only give them access to certain parts of your life where if they muck it up, it's okay, right? They can borrow your plastic bag, and if they throw that away, even though you wanted it back, that's okay. They can borrow your Tupperware, and if they throw that away, you kind of wanted it back, but it's not a big deal. And then you know, I'm not going to lend anything to them again because they don't really take good care of my stuff. So this, I think this striving for finding like a foolproof way to identify narcissistic people, or just any kind of unhealthy, dangerous, emotionally or physically dangerous people fast, I think that's the dangerous thing. Thinking that you can do that, that's really, really unsafe, and that's really just not smart. You got to realize, you know, you've got really dumb narcissists, really obvious ones. You also have really smart ones, okay? And they know all the ways to kind of evade the obvious signs. They know how to hide, okay? So you just, without being super suspicious and without being super worried that everyone's going to rip you off, just keep in mind, like, okay, this person, everything looks good, they seem great, but how long do I really know them? How well do I really know them? And if I give them access to something, if I share something with them, what if they take advantage? How much damage could that do? And if it could do a lot of damage, you want to be really careful with who you give that access to, and you want to be sure that person has been vetted, that you have tried it out with little things before. You've given them access to little things, to little bits of your, you know, history, or little bits of your personal feelings, and you've seen how they dealt with that, right? And okay, so yeah, I just think it's an interesting quest that some people are on. And this journalist, that conversation did not end well, and I got very frustrated, and he got very frustrated. But I just really think that idea that you can figure something complicated like that out of 5 minutes is really dangerous, and it's also very judgmental. You know, it's like, well, you just look for these 3 stereotypes, and then you're sure that this is a narcissist or it's not. It's just really stupid. It's way more complicated than that. And you know, you can have people who have some obnoxious traits that are narcissistic, but it doesn't mean they're a narcissist. Narcissism exists on the scale, so you can have some narcissistic traits, some things that you do that are pretty self-absorbed, and yet be, for the most part, a great person, right? And so then you're not a narcissist, you just have some narcissistic traits. So when you meet somebody for the first time, they might be showing you their narcissistic traits, especially if they're nervous or they're trying to, I don't know, be impressive or whatever. And so you might see like the worst side of them. And that doesn't mean that goes away. That's part of who they are for sure, but it may not be the whole story. Something I'm also very aware of, since I work with people who are often in a situation where they're very stressed. Stress tends to bring out the worst in people. Okay, so if you're dealing with somebody who's very, very stressed, chances are they're going to show you the worst, most obnoxious side of themselves, because they're not in a good frame of mind, and that's not a good place to assess them from or judge them from. So if you meet somebody for 5 minutes and they're super stressed, you're like, well, they have all these weird behaviors and therefore I'm sure they're this or that. You don't really know. You don't really know in the bigger context of how they normally are, what they're like. Yeah, so so long story short, there is no way to, I don't think there's a way. I don't believe there's a way to figure out in 5 minutes if someone's a narcissist, and also it's not healthy to look at people like this. Yeah, I think lastly, what's really important to realize is that narcissism is a combination of a lot of different things. And in part of my work, what I do as well is I do energy healing work, which there's a lot of different kinds of energy healing work out there, but the kind that I do and that I've developed and I continue to develop intuitively has more to do with, partly to do with measuring things. Because when you measure things, you know what you're dealing with, right? So of course, I've also been interested in what can I measure about what someone is really, really like underneath the surface. Of course, that's helpful, right? But all those psychological parameters that we use, all those names that we use, like narcissism or borderline, they're just a summing up of a bunch of different things that individually you cannot measure. But I think things I can measure is how, like, someone's willingness to feel their feelings. So that's something I can, like, there's a kind of skill for that. But that's just one element of what is going on with somebody. So, like, even if, just taking that further, even if there was a way to fully break down narcissism into all the little components and measure all those little things, what I've noticed too is that people's ability to do one thing or another, it can vary from day to day, right? So you can have people you can catch people on a bad day and they're totally unwilling to feel their feelings, and then the next day they're very willing. Some people are very stable, they're pretty much always the same way, and some people, they fluctuate a lot. So even if this was measurable, there would be so many elements to this that would make it finicky, where even if I could ideally measure this, if I could measure all the different elements that go into narcissism and like rate it on a scale, I would still need to measure that over a period of time to see if it was consistent. I still could not assess in 5 minutes that for sure this is what someone is, or this is what's going on with them. So it's just a little thought experiment, I do think, because I do understand the tendency and the desire, like if you have been taken in by narcissists one too many times and you've been heartbroken one too many times, you want to spot them early. You're like, how do I spot these fuckers like early, so I can stay away from them? I totally get that. And there's things that you can spot and there's things that you can't. But really it's more about learning to not let them in too much too soon and giving yourself time to evaluate. So that if this person is a very messed up person, you don't give them a chance to do a lot of damage. And by the time you really let them in deep, you've already vetted them, right? And often people just don't take enough time. And sometimes when I talk to people and they're like, yeah, but I took all this time. I took like 3 days. Like 3 days, that's nothing. I'm talking about months, okay? So like, look at like any area where you've been duped, like how much time did you take to really get to know someone? And the other thing is, how much time did you take where you were really kind of honest and direct with somebody? Because if you're just talking about the weather, or you're not going anywhere confrontational at all, or you're always just in agreement, you're always like, oh, whatever you want, that's fine, then you're not going to find the rough edges. You're not going to figure out, is this person nice to me because I go along with them, or are they nice because we get along great and they're a great person, right? And so there's a lot in your own behavior as well that is going to either make it really hard to figure out if someone's a narcissist or make it much easier. Typically, if you're willing to be a little bit more confrontational, you're going to figure out sooner that someone's a narcissist. If you're very much smooth everything over and just go along with things, it's going to take you a very, very long time. Because everyone is on their best behavior when they get what they want. Everyone is on their best behavior when you're not being difficult. Even narcissistic people. And they love it when you do what they want, okay? So one of the best ways, if this is a topic that you're struggling with, you're like, I want to figure out sooner who I'm dealing with. Like, the one part is what I said before, but where you decide how much access somebody gets. You don't just let them all the way in. You don't say, here's the keys to my house, I'm going to be on holiday, mi casa es tu casa, like do whatever you want. That's not a good strategy. But the other thing is you start to look at how you interact with people. Like, do you feel secure enough to say to somebody, like, actually, I hate that restaurant. Can we please go somewhere else? Or are you just going to like suck it up and just pretend that you like it because you don't want to offend, right? These things, and doing the work there, where you get to a place where you're not afraid to be confrontational, you're not afraid to be a little difficult, those things are going to really help you spot the narcissist quickly, because narcissists don't like it when you don't go along with them. So, you know, that's something when they show their other side, where you're like, actually, I really hate this restaurant. Can we go somewhere else? And then suddenly you might get like all this stuff in your face about how judgmental you are, and you never want to do anything. You're always difficult, and you know, and you're just like, it's just this one time, and just that particular restaurant I don't like. But that's how you find out. And, you know, a lot of us, especially if you've had experience with narcissistic people, you know how icky that confrontation can be. You know how overwhelming it can be, how soul-crushing it can be, how shocking it can be. And so chances are that you're doing everything you can to avoid those confrontations. And that's why you then never find out what someone's really like until it's really, really far down the road. So there are some things you can do to speed it up, you know, to speed up how quickly you spot narcissists. And it's actually less about understanding them, and it's less about, you need to know some things, but it's less about trying to figure them out. And it's more about how you relate to people and who you're willing to be and how you're willing to be from the get-go. And how secure you are in just being yourself. The more secure you get in that, the more clear you get, the more quickly you're going to get feedback from people on, you know, how they relate to that. But if you're kind of hiding and you're kind of going along, you're just trying to smooth things over, you're trying to not be difficult, it's going to take you a long time before kind of the icky people show themselves, because they have no reason to be upset with you because you're always so nice to them, right? So, yeah, that still doesn't make it 5 minutes, but it does make it a lot quicker than, I don't know, like 10 years. You can definitely, if you have a few interactions with somebody, I would say you can definitely figure out if they are narcissist or not after, well, it's hard to quantify because it depends on like what kind of conversation you have. I can't say. I can't say because, you know, a lot of my work, of course, I have very deep conversations with people, so I can figure it out in a few conversations because there's enough that comes up in a conversation that is deep and personal, you know, for them, and that how they deal with that is a very, very good indicator at some point of like, okay, is this a healthy person? Are they willing to look at their own stuff? Are they willing to look at their feelings? Or are they, you know, the moment I say something that could like make them look bad, you know, they're just all over me and it's just, I'm a bad person. Like that shows itself really quickly. But of course, like in normal everyday interactions, you don't really have that. But what you do have is if you have some kind of working relationship with them, you're gonna have little conflicts very quickly. But like I said, only when you're willing to stand your ground and you're willing to be honest about what you want and what you don't want. If you just go along with everything, they're gonna seem really great. But the moment where you say, actually, I am not available after 7 p.m., but they want you to be available, oh, all hell is gonna break loose, you know? And they might say it in a really like, they might smooth it over and say it in a certain way, but they're gonna be persistent that you have to do things their way, right? So in working relationships, you might know someone from afar, from meeting them in the hallway and just talking to them, you know, when you get on the elevator or whatever, and they seem like a nice person. Then when you have to work with them, you find out they're a horrible person. You suddenly understand why everyone is having trouble with this person because everything has to be their way, right? So yeah, you got to look at that as well. Like, how deep is your interaction with this person? Like, how well do you really know them? If you just meet them at a party and you're just kind of smooching and just, you know, just having fun conversations, you're probably not going to find out. But if you're dealing with them in some way where there's a lot of potential conflict because there are different needs and expectations, you're going to find out pretty quickly. And then you can definitely find out within a few weeks. You're like, oh, I think we're dealing with a narcissistic person here, because the moment I don't do what they want, suddenly everything is really, really complicated and dramatic. Yeah. All right. I hope this was helpful for you. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you are struggling with narcissism and with narcissistic people, and you've tried everything you could think of, but you still feel like, you know, the next date you're going to be on, you're probably going to fall for a narcissist again, this is a really, really good time to do the inner work. And if you would like some help with that, I have a program called Know the Narcissist. It's half a year really take our time so that you really can go through the material that comes with the program. And we have one-on-one sessions as well. And I teach you the healing work, and I teach you like what are the gaps, what are the things that you're missing that you don't realize that you're doing, right, in interacting with people, or that you don't realize you need to kind of be aware of when dealing with narcissistic people. We're going to fill in the gaps, and we're going to fill in the gaps as well around how you can do the healing work so that you are willing and able to be that person who's going to bring out the narcissism in others much more quickly, because that is actually a good thing, because then you can see it and then you can deal with it and then you can move on. All right. Thanks so much for listening. Bye-bye.